Hey everyone, this is Bob Thibodeau here. Welcome to another Ask Bob podcast special. Now, I get asked all the time, different questions about podcasting, and I try and post them here to help you out because if I get asked this question once or twice, I know there's a lot of you out here who have the same question. And one question I get asked a lot is, how can I increase my download numbers? Now, downloads are very important when it comes to podcasting. But before I get into answering that question, I want to take a couple of episodes to lay the foundation upon which we can build in answering that question. And the foundation is one which will help you to focus on the ethical ways to increase your download numbers. First, let me give you some background on recent changes that were made within the past couple of years, and they've been implemented across the podcasting industry that affect how download numbers are actually counted. Now, due to the popularity and the growth of podcasting, advertisers wanted in on the possible exposure that a podcast audience could give to their brands and increase their sales and services and things like that. Back in 2014, there was no industry standard, and an advertiser really had to just rely on the data provided by the podcasters and the podcast hosting companies. And it varied from host to host. And in an effort to bring some conformity, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, called the AIB, came up with some standards that would help in this area. And although they were not mandatory, they released what is known as the Podcast Measurement Technical Guidelines, version 1.0 in 2016. The IAB then released version 2.0, which updated the methods of and redefined a little bit methods of counting downloads, and they released that in 2018. Now, neither of these releases generated much support from podcasters. Podcast hosting companies, they were looking at them and they really want to go to the process of trying to bring these changes about. But the advertisers were insisting on it because they're the ones who had the money, right? Well, later in 2018, the IAB came out with a certification and compliance program. This was a way for podcast hosting companies to prove to potential advertisers their method of counting downloads translated into real people and not some computer bots that were being indicated by the downloads, but that real people were actually downloading and listening to the podcast. Now, this system has since been adopted as the industry standard and has added credibility for podcasters in an effort to secure advertising revenue. Now, with the new AIB rules that have gone into effect, downloads are not tracked the same as they used to be. And before the new change a year or so ago, every time a download started, it counted as a download. It didn't matter if it was listened to for 2 seconds, 10 seconds, or 10 minutes, it still counted as a download. And this caused a lot of people to come up with various ways to increase their download numbers, and a lot of it was not very ethical. Although some of the techniques are still used today, the new AIB methods of counting a download really can be summed down to one sentence. A download must be played for a minimum of 60 seconds in order to count. Now, there's other things that go into that, but that is one that is very easy for a podcaster to grasp and understand. Now, like I said, there are a few other technical terms that apply, but for the most part, that's what you're trying to do now as a podcaster. Have your potential listeners listen for at least 60 to 90 seconds or more, hopefully, but anything less, it doesn't count as a download. And the software almost every podcast host company uses now incorporates the new AIB method of counting downloads. There's still plenty of unscrupulous folks out there that try to cheat the system. So you need to be aware of some tactics that they may try to push you into. Now, first and foremost, do not waste your money on those, hire us to give you thousands of download scams. No matter what they claim or however many downloads you do receive, they are all bogus. I mean, what matters the most to subscribers? If you have 50,000 downloads and only 10 actual people who subscribe to your podcast, really it means nothing. It's all an ego boost for you. Now, let's say you're selling some type of product or service. Would you rather spend your money on trying to reach 50,000 people who could care less about you, your product, or your podcast, or reach 500 people who want and need your product or service? Where would you rather spend your money in an effort to sell your products or services? Right? That being said, we'll be going through some things that are still being pushed as ways to increase your downloads, but that you definitely should not use. Okay. In the next couple of episodes, I'm going to cover a few of the unethical ways you might be tempted to increase your downloads. Why will I focus on this first? Because they are so easy to implement. They're still being promoted as ways to increase your downloads. And if you're not careful, you may fall for a couple of these traps. So come back or click the next episode, and we'll get started on methods you should not use to increase your download numbers. Now, if you have a podcasting question, send it along to me. You can leave your questions in the comments section below, but a better way of communicating with me and making sure I'm able to see your questions rapidly is by using the contact form on the website. Go to podcast-training.com/contact and click on the contact tab. Fill out the form. Be sure to send me your questions. Now, if your question is used on this podcast, I'll be giving you credit for it for bringing it to my attention, and you'll receive a free download of my book, The Complete Guide to Podcasting. That's a $37 value. You'll receive it free if you send along your questions and they're used on the Ask Bob program. If you include your website or podcast information, I will also reference that as well and put your information in the podcast show notes down below. Who knows? You may see some increased traffic to your website, your podcast, etc., just from asking me a question. If I ask the same question, and that's happened, the first person to ask it will be the one getting the credit. So if you have a question, don't wait. Ask today. Just go to podcast-training.com, fill out the contact form, and ask Bob. Talk to you soon.